Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Search, Deploy, Commit. I'm your host, Jack, and I'm here with one of the biggest map makers in Warzone, Murk. Thank you so much for being on the show with me today. I really greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm excited to be. I'm honored to be here. One of the biggest
Stop.
map makers. I wouldn't have called it myself that, but I'm honored. Yeah.
I think so. I honestly believe so, and I think everybody has played on one of your maps. I think your maps are a big part of the single player experience over time as well. And so I'm always excited to have people on, and I really appreciate you being a part of this show. And I always like to start with a very specific question, and I think everybody's anticipating me asking, but I have something based on the maps that you created that I was thinking about, and I have an opinion, but I wanted to get
Right.
yours. This might be a little bit out there, but who was the greater conqueror, Alexander or Genghis?
The greater conqueror.
Yes, in your perspective.
Yeah, Genghis, I think.
Interesting.
Uh,
Any particular reason why?
yeah, I'm trying to phrase my answer carefully. I think Genghis or maybe his successors, the Mongolian Empire in general, did a bit more conquering. What Alexander did was more of a change of dynasty. He basically took over the Persian Empire largely intact and just replaced the ruling dynasty with his own, or tried to do that. It didn't really work out. So I think Alexander was maybe better at battles and as a leader, but he did much less conquering.
Interesting. I like that answer. That's good. And I had to ask something out of the ordinary just to kick things
yeah, you
off.
caught me off guard. Yeah.
We're gonna step right back into
But only good.
the
Only
usual, which is, how did you get started playing Warzone?
Yeah, I think I looked it up. I had to look it up. I made my account in 2014.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, I played a while before that. I think at Armor Games. I know that previous interviews you did, a lot of people mentioned Congregate, which is kind of similar. Both were these websites, hubs for Flash games back in the day when Flash games still existed. And there were thousands of Flash games there. And usually it was, you enjoyed a game for a few hours. Maybe you played it an afternoon, and then generally you would move on to the next one and forget all about it. And being honest, for me, Warzone would have been like that as well. I liked it. I liked Risk as a game. I think I played it for an afternoon, and then I would have probably moved on and forgotten about it if I hadn't found the map page on the website. And I always say this, I really stuck around for the maps, and I still enjoy the game. I play it sometimes, but it's mainly the maps for me.
Yeah, I think that's it's quite apparent in your designs as well. And I was curious, it sounds like obviously you enjoy other games, and that was kind of leading into my next question. If you're not playing games on Warzone, or maybe focused more on maps, what other types of games do you like to play? Maybe in the same genre or preferences. I myself find myself playing a lot of board games.
Yes,
it's where I tend to fall.
Yes, my main love is for the face-to-face board games. I do enjoy online games or video games or whatever. But even there, it's generally co-op games with, I have a lot of brothers who I don't always see as often as I would like, but we play a lot of online co-op games, which is very nice. And then you have all kind of different puzzle games, city builders, things like that. If I play games on my own, I think it would mainly be strategy. But I have a hate-love relationship with strategy games. I really enjoy them, but they always frustrate me a little bit as well.
I won't pry too much into that because I think everybody wants to get into what we know you for, which is, your map making. How did you get started making maps? I mean, it sounds like you found this corner of Warzone. Like we all seem to find our corners uh, that
Yes.
mean a lot to us. How did you
Yeah.
get started?
Yeah. So like I said, it's right from the start. It's been for Warzone at least looking at the maps that I started with and just playing on all the different maps and exploring all of those. I think I started making my own fairly quickly. It took very long before I published one because the first maps that I made, I think that goes for everyone. They were pretty terrible. But I think that's the great thing about at least the Warzone maps is they can be very simple to make. I think if you start out and you grab the wiki and you download Inkscape, and then I think within 2 or 3 hours you could have the first map done, which is very much a benefit. So it wasn't a long process to get into the map making for Warzone.
No, I think that's great, and I think looking at your maps in general, you tend to be very historical, right? And
Right.
you mentioned that you love looking at maps. Is there a historical, reference or book or movie or something that you think everybody should look at,
Wow.
from your perspective?
I would have a very difficult time choosing one. I could tell you a lot of maps, historical maps that I think are very beautiful or very interesting. And we could do an entire episode with me just talking about maps. Please don't tempt me.
No.
But choosing one would be very difficult. For me, I'm a bit of a history nerd, as might be obvious. And for me, it always starts with Wikipedia. Wikipedia is such an amazing pinnacle of community-based science and information. So if I had to recommend anything, it is to open up a random historical Wikipedia page and see where it takes you. And it will probably take you very far.
Wow. I love that answer. I think that's great. I used to, as a kid, just find encyclopedias and just find myself
exactly.
just perusing forever.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, historically, I think that's really good advice. It's a similar thought when you say it. When you look at your games, I think there's so many different parts about them, and your maps specifically are so specific to the time era or the function in which you find yourself. I mean, I look at the ones, obviously you have the Alexander map, the Genghis Khan map, with some of your older ones.
Yeah.
How do you start breaking down what that looks like? Like, how do you get started on one of those ideas?
Oh, that's a good connection with the previous question, because I do think it often starts with Wikipedia, or sometimes any other kind of source. I don't make or publish a lot of maps on Warzone, and I think the reason is because for me the maps really only come near the end of the process, in which the process often is I'm just reading something that interests me, and at some point as I read more about it and learn more about it, I think now I would like to make a map about this topic or about this period. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I'm reading about a certain topic and it doesn't trigger me to make a map about it. Sometimes it does, but it always comes from an interest first, and then the decision to make a map always comes later. It's never the other way around.
Interesting.
So if you mention the Alexander map, that's just a result of me reading a book about Alexander the Great and thinking, this is interesting. I want to draw a map of this.
Wow. So it's so much of it. And I think what's interesting about your perspective on the maps is a lot of times players may look at your bonuses and are like, wow, this is such a unique, I could set up all these different factions under these
Right.
bonuses, but I feel like your perspective is more, no, this is just where they were, right? Like this is the
Yeah.
historical part of it.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting, right? Is I talk to all these people on Warzone and have all these different perspectives, and I think specifically, I would really like to talk to you about Beaver Wars, because I think this is one that everybody seems to have played on, and I think it's so interesting. And I have some historical heritage in that game, and I
Right.
think it's really cool to see it in this way, in a way that you don't normally see America. So I'd like you to just kind of expound upon that map and how you came up with even like the trade and the hunting spaces
Yeah.
and bonuses too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the story, for the people listening, the story of the Beaver Wars is pretty crazy to start out with. It's these Europeans ending up in North America for the first time, finding out that there's a lot of natural resources there that they have completely depleted in Europe, like animals with fur. And it's the Dutch and the English and the French that first start trading guns for beaver pelts. And the main Native American faction that they trade the guns with is the Iroquois. And they use those guns to then conquer a large part of eastern North America, and then hunt all the beavers there to trade those for more guns, and then conquer more and hunt more beavers and get more guns and conquer more. And it's like this avalanche of beaver hunting warfare, which is crazy. And it's an interesting story. And especially if you look at the historical maps on Warzone, there are a lot of amazing and very great historical maps, but they tend to be very Eurocentric. Mostly European maps, sometimes a little bit of Asia, sometimes a little bit of American modern history, but there is a lack of pre-colonial non-European maps. So then if you encounter a story like this, if I encounter a story like this, I think that would be a great one to put into a map, publish it on Warzone, and share the story with other people.
That's really great. I think what's so interesting is that I think part of why you enjoy making maps is you just love sharing those stories. And I think a big part of why we like these types of games in general, why players like diplomacy style maps, or any of the games that we play, is we're following the story, I feel like, more so than the actual strategy sometimes, right?
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
really appreciate
absolutely. Sometimes, I think, is an important word here. But I absolutely agree with you. At least from my end, the story and the history and the tales behind it are the main aspect of the map making. I do also recognize, I would probably call that my main weakness as a map maker as well, that I tend to prioritize the map and the aesthetics and the story of the map over the gameplay. So I think that's both a strength and a weakness.
I think that's interesting, and I was going to ask this later, but kind of looking at some of your games and your maps. I keep saying games, but I mean maps. I think that there's some feedback that I've read on them, and I don't get into the strategy as much as some people I think in Warzone do. Obviously, right? I mean, it's a big part of the game, but I think as a map maker more than somebody that makes games, because there's so much customization in making
Right.
a game. It could maybe just be the wrong setup for your
Yeah.
map, and you just have no control over that, but you get reviewed on whatever people say. And I think it's probably one of the most public places that you can have your work critiqued in the game. It may be over anything else. So I wanted to ask you, how do you handle, critique or feedback, or what does that process look like? Because it sounds like a lot of your map making is, more based around the map and the historical facts and the story you're trying to create versus maybe the actual playability, like you said.
Yeah. I think there are two sides to that. The first thing you mention is that a lot of the map reviews are very much based on a specific game or a specific template or specific settings. And that's just a fact of life with Warzone. I have had, I would call it lucky. I have been lucky that none of my maps have been used for the single player campaign. It's a joke within like the Warzone map making community that as soon as your map is used for the single player campaign, then that's the end of any positive ratings. Because a lot of people who play that campaign will rate the map as if they are rating the level. So they will come to the map to complain about the level. And there are some great maps in Warzone that have been review bombed into non-existent because they were in the single player campaign. But that's just something, that's how the system works. And
Sure.
Yeah, you learn to live with it. But there are also a lot of very honest and probably valid critiques also of my maps, about the strategic gameplay of it, that I honestly tend to agree with. I'm not a very strong strategic player myself. I'm not embarrassed if I play a game on Warzone, but I'm not a very good strategic player. So then I think almost obviously I can never make a perfect strategic map, because I just don't know what that would entail to the level that some of the top strategic players of Warzone do understand it. So in that case, critique and feedback and reviews are only welcome.
That's interesting. And I just wanted to kind of get your perspective on it, because I think, I've talked to some other people that do map making, probably more specifically for the strategy. I almost said Stratego. That's hilarious. The strategy side of Warzone. And I think that, I love your style of map making. I appreciate this, and I know other players appreciate this style that you have, which is more historically based and more based around the story. Right. And I think you fill that niche really well. And I think this is a great segue into your latest map, which is Conquerors of the Great Ocean, which I mean, just released, fairly recently within the recording of
Fresh
this
off the press.
Yeah, and I think it's, and I realize this is the first game that you and I are in together. We were in
very shortly
on this one, and yeah, I was not playing very well. But what I think is so interesting about that map is how it's set up, and I was just. Maybe I just don't play on enough different types of maps, and I definitely haven't been in Warzone as long as you have. But how did you come up with the movement in the water on this map? I was just thinking about this has got to be a massive amount of work, and I wanted to know more about where this idea came up with, or if you had seen something like this before. It seemed like it was something new to me.
I think so. I don't think it's directly based on anything else. It has a system where on the C tiles you can move ahead more than one tile. So every C tile connects to tiles a few steps away. And the inspiration, of course, was that it is a sea-based map. It's about Austronesian explorers long time ago moving from island to island and discovering the Pacific Ocean. So I was looking for a kind of system where you have very fast sea movement, and also the sea movement is practically impossible to block. And I think on a lot of Warzone maps with sea tiles, the sea tiles become, it often devolves very quickly into sort of king of the hill situation, where if you are able to keep a sea tile and block it off, then that's a very good defensive position. And I wanted to prevent that because it didn't fit, as we have been talking about, it didn't quite fit the story of explorers moving out and going to the far side of the ocean. I don't know specifically where the idea to make it a hex map came from. I have seen hex maps previously. So probably parts of the concept are floating around on different Warzone maps. I can't claim that it's a purely original idea, but I have no idea where it would come from.
And I think it's so great in that, it just continues to play to your perspective on, and what's great is that it's this mixed piece of strategy, but it's really just more about the realism,
right?
Which is what I think is so great about this map for you. And it's almost like this accumulation of your prior map making to this point, in that you really are just expanding beyond what maybe most people have seen in maps.
Yes,
but
yeah.
also because of the realism that you're trying to bring to it. And I think that's much appreciated, regardless of maybe what people think. I think your work needs to be appreciated for that type of aspect, because I had to think about this game so differently when I was playing. And I couldn't wrap my head around it the first time, but I'm excited to try it again and start it up with my group. So,
and I think that's the interesting thing. I don't know how it will play out either. And I think in this case, I'm actually not sure if it improves gameplay. It might not. It might be a lot more hassle than it's worth. But you don't know that until you try it out. So someone needs to try it out. And I'm not the only one that does that, of course. There are a whole lot of map makers that always come up with these very innovative ideas.
Yeah.
And then from what I know of people who are really into the strategic side of the game, it's not only the map that matters when it comes to how strategic a game is. It's more on the template side. So I think as map makers, the only thing you can do is throw concepts at the wall and then see what sticks. And if someone from the strategic community wants to pick it up and make a good template out of it, and if that's usable, but you can only wait and see.
That's really interesting. And I think maybe that's what makes Warzone so unique in some ways, is that you have map makers like yourself kind of providing this space, but then it's up to those game makers there's so much control, right? And it could be for a single player experience, or a multiplayer experience. Some people change it into totally different things. And I guess, what is if you are going to play a game of Warzone, how do you prefer to set it up? Or do you find yourself more in the idle or the single player realms when you are playing? What is your preferred setup?
This is going to sound a bit arrogant, which I don't want to imply. I don't have time to play all that much Warzone, and whenever I do make a new map, I do want to run like 10 or 20 games on it just to see how it plays. So in practice, most of my time playing Warzone is spent on my own maps.
Nice.
That's just how it works out. I know in the past, and this is no, I should save this topic. I think you generally ask people what they would like to see improved to the game.
That's okay. We can jump to that.
In the past, and this was a long time ago, before there was such a thing as quick match, and I played a lot of games through the real-time open games lobby, which still exists, but I don't know if you've taken a look at it recently. It is fairly dead, the real-time open game lobby. And in the past, before quick match, that was the hotspot for all real-time games. There was no way to start a game with one click of the button. So whenever you wanted to play a real-time game, you would go to the open games lobby. As a benefit over quick match has these set or fixed templates that are very difficult to swap out. So most people only play the quick match on those few templates. And by comparison, the open games lobby was much more suitable for exploration and for discovery and for people just picking a map at random or picking whatever settings they found interesting at that day, and then you would play a short game on it and move on to the next one. And I think that encouraged a lot more exploration of different maps and different settings and different games. So in the past, that's a lot of what I did. Go to the open games lobby, pick a game that looked interesting. It usually only took 10 minutes or half an hour, and allowed me to play a lot of different settings and a lot of different games, which was great. And I miss that a bit.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, I have found myself in probably a similar perspective for you, and you're right. There's not as many open games as there used to be, right? And
the multi-day lobby is still very active and very alive, and that's great. But because it is multi-day, it's much more of a commitment to join a game. You'll be playing that game for weeks on end.
Sure.
So it doesn't encourage that creativity or that sense of exploration as much as the real-time open games lobby did. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I wonder if Warzone could create more templates as just a base opening, maybe even from some of the multiplayer games in the open lobby for multi-day, and just duplicate them. I'm sure there's a way to go about doing it.
Yeah, something like that. I think a while back, Visser shared this very interesting statistic where he said that 2/3 of all Warzone games are played on just 11 maps. So there are 11 maps that the vast majority of the Warzone games is played on. And that was a very interesting tidbit, and it's a neat piece of information. But also, for a map-making community, it's also a little bit of a tragic factoid that whenever you make a new map, the chance of people actually playing on it is very small. So that's why I think it's also good to not just make maps to have people play on it, but also because you want to make the map. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I don't think you could have put it any better than what you did by saying, it is tragic. It's sad that there's so many great maps, like your own and like others that are out there that just don't get played on as much with how many are made. Yeah, definitely. I think always encourage others to experiment with their creativity, whether it be, maybe not actually making a map, but actually playing on the map and trying something new.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think is a big proponent of most creators that I interview on here, including yourself, has said.
Yeah.
So
you always put it very nicely. I think throughout the podcast, you always come back to the singular point that Warzone is very diverse in its community, and that there's people from all different aspects of the game that use each other's resources and each other's knowledge and experience. And I think we're very good at that. But I would like to encourage it a little bit more. Yeah,
certainly. And it kind of, one thing I haven't asked, I don't know how we haven't asked this question already, but I wanted to make sure if you had to pick one of your maps. I mean, is it the latest and the greatest? Is that your current favorite map out of your entire list?
Oh no, you can't ask a parent which of their children they like best. Let's
say the children aren't here. Let's say they're not listening.
No-go. Okay, this is a Sophie's choice. And gee, what a difficult question. I think you are right that it might be the latest one. If there's a new one under construction, I'm sure it's the one under construction. From my end, I think there's one map. It's called Flower Wars. It's a map that I made about basically the Aztec Empire and in the region of it, which was a far too ambitious project, especially at the time with the map size limits. Every map file could only be 2 MB. So I made a whole lot of illustrations and a big map that then just wasn't able to upload to Warzone. So I had to scrap a lot of it. And it didn't quite work out. It's the kind of map that I can still see the potential in it, and I can see all the things that I had to remove. But the finished product of it just isn't quite what I would have wanted it to be. So I think I have a special place in my heart for that one, as probably the map that I love the potential of the most.
That's really interesting, and I think that, perhaps every map maker, especially in Warzone, has those projects that are their labor of love that aren't maybe received by the public. So I think that's really interesting, and I hope that people listening check out this map. And
I hope so too.
One thing that
I do
don't
have
know how
a lot
I haven't asked. Oh
no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think one thing I haven't even talked to you about is your art. I'm assuming that you create this all yourself. I mean, this is some of the art in this map in particular that you've been talking about is just so great. And I'm assuming it's based off of something, but a lot of this, there's no way. I don't think I've seen anything like some of this before. So I have to ask that. I'm assuming you do your own art.
Yes. If it's no, actually, yeah. Sometimes there are images that I can trace, but that's actually, now that I look at it, fairly little. So let's say 95% of it is original. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it adds so much character. I mean, and the amount of detail that you put on these pieces is quite significant. And a big part of any map maker, I think, especially the ones that you notice that are some of the best, they take time and effort to make sure that they're adding character and flavor to their maps.
Yeah.
And I think, your work in particular is so historically based that it really pulls you into the space that you're trying to create. How do you talk to us a little bit about your process for deciding on some of those things as well?
I'm not sure if there's a unified process, if it's always the same. Like I said, I generally just start with reading up because it's all historical. So I'm reading about historical things, and then I think I want to put this on a map. And then the illustrations really only come very late in the process, and really depend on how much space do I still have left? What is the kind of story that you want to tell? And like I mentioned, for Warzone in particular, how much file size do I still have left? Because that's just an upper limit that you can't go past. And as much as I appreciate the praise and your compliments, the art in my maps is never like essential for the map. It is maybe essential for the way the map looks and for how it feels, but it would be playable without the illustrations. And I know there are also some great map makers, even some that you have had on the podcast, who are much better at integrating the art and the layout into the play style and the gameplay of the map. So that is something that I would still like to learn. Maybe to integrate it a little bit better into the process and make sure that it's all connected. If I'm not getting too vague here.
No. And I think it's just something that often maybe just gets overlooked as we're all playing these awesome maps. And the reason that they're awesome is because of the amount of detail that you guys put into it, and especially, your art in general and the general vibe. And, I look at some of the, this obviously is a grand project, but, you look at probably your most famous map, like 7 Years War.
Right.
And there's so much, and I think, there's so many different ways that you go about putting bonuses, and even your latest map where you have all of this space in the ocean. And how do you, I guess with your wealth of knowledge and doing this over the years, what would you give advice to somebody that's maybe wanting to start making maps? Where would you point them, or what kind of advice would you give to somebody that says, Murk, I just want to get started. What should I do?
No false humility intended. I would probably advise not to do it the way that I do it. A lot of people who start making maps and then also make really good maps start by finding a good source map and then using that to turn it into a Warzone map. Which is, of course, I start with Wikipedia pages and books that I have in the library and trying to scrunch that all together into a map, which for me is a very enjoyable process, but it's probably not the most efficient way to make a map. If you can find a good source map and you can use that to translate it into a Warzone map, then I think you already have the basis of a very good map on your hands. Open up the map-making wiki or one of the great tutorials that float around on YouTube. I think Ninja Nick had quite a few good tutorials. Look at those, and then in an evening of work, you could have a very good Warzone map.
That's great. I think a lot of people have always, map makers specifically, have always deferred to other map makers that have helped them, excuse me, as they continue through their map making process. And I think you're probably one of the ones that have, been there for the long haul in comparison to some of the others.
Right.
But, what you talk about how little maps are actually played. You talk about how your games are very important and special to you because of the stories that you find and grab your attention and you want to make maps out of. But what is it that brings you back to Warzone? There's a lot of work involved, and what is it about Warzone that has always seemed to have you continue to make these awesome maps?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think that's a good question because I don't know the answer. I think that's what I mean to say. For me, I think Warzone by now has become, for me, so implicitly connected to the map making and to reading stories that I enjoy and to being creative. I use Inkscape. Inkscape is a piece of software that's used a lot for the map making and for drawing the maps. And I use it quite a lot for other kinds of illustrations now. Just making drawings or whatever kind of creative illustrations I want to make. And I initially started using it because of Warzone. So I keep coming back to Warzone because Warzone is now an essential part of my creative hobby. That I would have a hard time seeing Warzone separate from the creativeness and the drawings and the historical stories. So it's a game that I enjoy. I enjoy playing it. Separately, I enjoy making illustrations. And Warzone is the thing that kind of connected the two. And I'm not sure I could break them apart if I wanted to.
Wow. I think that's just a testament to, what makes this game so interesting for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think everybody would be a little more for the lesser if we didn't have your map. So I really appreciate what you bring to the community and your unique perspective and the historical side that a lot of maps I think maybe try to focus on, but I don't know if they can catch and capture the historical piece of it like your maps do. So thank you for that. Thank you for being on the show and for being a part of this group.
Thank you. It has been a very flattering interview. It's good for my ego. No, and I think you're right. Warzone, it's a great game with a lot of aspects to it. And I think everyone contributes a little bit in their own way, including you. So thank you for the podcast and thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you all for listening. Please join us in the next one. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast or to the YouTube channel, please feel free to do so, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, all.